I feel like after Matthew's introduction, I should say, well, thank you very much, St. Matthew. But I won't. I won't say that. So, young folks, we have a saying, and that saying is camp is about the campers. And that's been the motto since this camp was started. And you all should know that that is what this camp is about. It's about you all. You are the engine that runs it. And you're why these people that's a little bit older than you are here, because of you. And I just want to mention, for those of us that have the privilege from time to time to get to share a lesson with you all, that it means so much as you get ready to get up here and you hear people singing praises to the Lord at the top of their voice, and it's just so beautiful. And I get, I'm one of these people that I just, I get a little emotional. Sometimes it'll make a tear come to my eye and the hair will start standing up on my arm. And you all are just really, really make it a wonderful worship experience, the way you sing praises to the Lord. And I thank you for that. And let me just say this, you all are special. I fully understand that as I get older, that one day one of you may be the one that's caring for me. One of you may be the one that sees that I get proper medical treatment. One of you may be the one that helps me in my church work. You all may be the one that helps make decisions for me. And when I look around and I think about you all, I think maybe we're going to be in good shape. I know people say there's a lot of things going on in the world, but when I look at the caliber of the young folks that comes to camp with us year after year, it amazes me. And I'm going to get on with the lesson in a second, but I told Debbie this morning I was a little concerned because for the last 4 years of camp, of course we missed year before last, but the last 4 years of camp, I've told her the camp has been perfect. It's just been perfect. Everything's just went so good, and young folks that were outstanding. And then I sat there and listened to you a while ago, and I thought, no, this is going to be another great year of camp. And thank you all for being here. In the last hour or so, a lot of decisions have been made. And some were made with just a very small amount of thought, and some of it was made with a great deal of thought. A lot of those decisions were made by those of you that's sitting down here in the lower part, and I'm talking to you young folks. So I'm going to tell you right now, tonight's lesson is for you. It applies to all of us. It applies to every single person here. But this lesson is for you, because my greatest desire is to help you in any way I can. And it starts with this lesson. And I said that there was a lot of decisions made. So as we walk through that supper line, some people call it dinner. I'm in the country, I call it supper. But as we walk through that line, you had decisions to make, right? Do I get bologna? Do I get ham? Do I get turkey? Which do I get? Is it the blue Doritos or the red Doritos? Or am I a Cheetos kind of person? You know, you had to make all those decisions. Cheese or no cheese. Now, Mr. Jimmy tried to sell that cheese pretty hard. People had a tough time making decisions, but you had to make a decision. And then even as you got ready to come down here for this service, you had to make a decision. A lot of you girls, you were going, do I wear this dress or this dress? Am I going to wear this blouse or this blouse? Am I going to wear my hair this? Am I going to put my hair up? No, I'm going to leave it. No, I'm going to pull it back. No, I'm going to comb it out. No, lots of decisions to make, right? And you finally made that decision and you went with that decision. Now on the boys' end, that wasn't hardly as difficult a decision to make because, well, they're boys. Even though when I walked through the crowd a while ago, from the way I smelled some of them, I think they were having to make some decision about what kind of good smell stuff to put on, to try to, I'm sure, influence the girls. And some of them, and I know, spent a little time with their hair and made that decision. Fortunately, I'm not one of them. You can look at my hair and you can tell there's not many decisions to be made about that. Yeah, it's going to be what it's going to be. It's going to decide for itself, and usually does. But But you all made decisions. And then you come down here and you got to decide, am I going to sit here? Am I going to sit here? Am I going to sit beside this friend, that friend? Am I going to sit beside a new friend? And you made all those decisions. And as you make those decisions, sometimes you have to make harder decisions. And sometimes tougher decisions. And as you make decisions, every decision that you ever make will have some kind of impact. It's just like when any kind of force hits something, there's some type of impact. It may be minimum, it may be large, but there's always some kind of impact. Not all impactful decisions are life-changing, but some decisions will make a huge difference. And you may not always know the difference when you make those decisions. You won't always know. But often, a lot of the decisions, young folks, that you make them before you ever reach the age of 18. A lot of the big decisions you make in life, you make before you ever reach the age of 18. Some of the decisions that you will make before you reach the age of 18 will affect you the rest of your life. If you live to be as old gray-bearded Mr. Edward back there, if you live that long, you'll still have decisions that will impact you that long. So, I'm a goat farmer. As a matter of fact, I did surgery on a goat before I left home, and I ended up with some purple medicine on my thumbs, and I was afraid you all would see it, but I scrubbed and scrubbed, and I put on gloves when y'all went through the line so y'all couldn't see my medicine on my hands. But when I'm not a goat farmer, I'm a lawyer. That's what pays the bills. And as a lawyer, I head to court from time to time, just like a couple other of the counselors that's gathered here today. And on any given week, young folks, I can go into juvenile court, and I'll walk into juvenile court, and on this side of the courtroom, there's a 16-year-old boy sitting with his parents. And on this side of the courtroom, there's a 15-year-old girl who is now pregnant that's sitting with her parents. And we've got two children in a courtroom trying to figure out what to do with a child when they're children themselves. Somebody made a decision. Two somebodies made a decision that brought them to that situation in court. I walk into that courtroom and I see a 17-year-old boy who the judge is going to make a decision that day if that 17-year-old boy is going to be tried as an adult for cooking meth. And if the judge rules that he's going to be tried as an adult, then he'll likely serve 10 years in an adult penitentiary if found guilty. We got several 17-year-olds here. I went back and counted. I know. Somebody made a decision, and it wasn't a good decision that put him in that situation. I walk into that same courtroom. Listen to me here, people. Girls, listen to me. And I see a 17-year-old girl that has black teeth. Black teeth. And she cannot stop moving the whole time she's in court. Literally, we used to have the old saying, she's got ain'ts in her paints. But it ain't from ain'ts in her paints. And she already looks like she should be in one of these movies where they have these mummies, because she's literally dried up. 17-year-old girl that was once a very beautiful girl. Somebody made a decision. Somebody made a poor decision as a young person. before she ever reached the age of 18. And this last one I want to give you an example of. I want to talk to both the boys and girls. The other one is, I see the young lady, though, that ran away from home. She thought there was something better than home, and she made a conscious decision. And she's in court as a runaway, but where did they find her? They found her in another state where she had been kidnapped as a slave for human trafficking. And young folks, there's a lot of terrible things that go on with that, but that's what had happened to her. One county over from where you're sitting tonight, okay? Let's bring it home. One county over from where you're sitting tonight. Somebody made a bad decision. I tell you those bad decisions because I want you to see how and when and where good decisions are made and how to get to those good decisions. And wouldn't you know it, God, through his Holy Scriptures, has provided us with several good examples in the Bible where young folks like you made good decisions, made really good decisions. And so I want to look again at why they were made, when they were made, how they were made, and what the circumstances were. The first one I want to talk to you about, you know the story, but my guess is you've really never thought about somebody in this story that, though it doesn't seem like she's the main character, she really was. So here's the story. It's from 2 Kings in chapter 5. And in 2 Kings chapter 5, there was this fella, and he was the head of the Syrian army. And his name was Nahum, or some people say Naaman. But if I get to saying it like that, it comes out Naaman. So I just say Nahum, and it makes it stop. But he was powerful. The Bible tells us he was a great warrior. The Bible tells us that the king of Syria, your translation may call him the king of Arabia, but anyway, it's the same geographical area. And this guy was a great warrior, led his forces, led him in and out, as they say. Was his, the Bible calls him a captain, but in our day and time, he would be a 4-star general. He would be at the top of the military. And this guy, Naaman, who had all that power and everything else, he had a problem. And his problem was he had a disease called leprosy. And if you had leprosy, they called you a leper, L-E-P-E-R. Not a leopard, but a leper. And what leprosy was it was a incurable by man, that's important, disease that was a flesh-eating disease. And it's nasty and ugly to think about, and it's sad. But it was a flesh-eating disease. Typically, lepers would keep their face kind of covered, in part because of custom, but in part because one of the first things that would happen is their nose would get eat off by this disease. And like I said, it would eventually kill them. So this guy was a powerful general, and but he had this disease. As being a powerful general, he had people in his household, he had servants, he had whatever. And it just so happened, it says that there was this little girl. She was a slave. I said she was a slave. She was from Israel. She was Jewish. And on occasion, the bands of Syrians had went up into Israel and they had captured her, this little girl, and brought her back to Naaman's household, and he was the helper for his wife. I think the Bible calls her a maid, but she was a helper for the fellow that was sick. Now, most of the time, when you hear this story, it's along the lines of, as Alonzo Jones used to say, 7 ducks in a dirty pond. Isn't that what he used to say, Edward? Something like that. But I'm not talking about that. I want to talk about this little girl because she was like you all. And in this situation, she made a good decision, a really good decision. Because this is what she knew. Even though she was a slave here in Syria, she knew that back home in Israel, there was a man. Not just any man, but a man of God. And his name was Elisha. And he was not just any man of God. He was one of the main prophets of God in Israel. And this little girl knew about Elisha. She knew about God. She had faith. And she had a decision to make. She knew that this prophet Elisha, with God working through him, could heal her master, her boss, the head of the household, however you want to call it, of that leprosy. Man couldn't. He's incurable by man. But she knew that God working through him could. She had a decision to make. And think about it before she made the decision. Who was she to say something about it? Who was she to even talk about it? Servants aren't supposed to be heard from. And if she said anything about her boss's leprosy, well, it could mean she might be punished. She might be sold to somebody else. She might be scolded, all these things. But she believed in her faith in God, and she believed in Elisha, and she believed in the power of God to do miraculous things at that time, which he could. And she made a decision. And that decision was, I'm going to tell him. And she did. She goes to her and says, I don't know what she called her. Ma'am, you see, back in my country where I came from, there is this man named Elisha. And he's a man of God. He can heal my boss. He can do that. Folks, she made a good decision. She might have been putting herself at risk, but she made a decision that she knew that was consistent with what her belief in God was, that was consistent with what she'd been taught about it. And so, as the story does go on, her boss did go to Elijah, and subsequently, he indeed was healed of that. And then there was something that was pretty interesting, because after that, after she went and made that or made that statement, and he was healed, after that, it's amazing that Elisha ended up saying this. Let me get to it. And this is what he said. He said, now, behold, now I know this is verse 16, by the way, 15. Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. This man that had no belief in God whatsoever, this country that was not a God-fearing country, because this little girl made a good decision. She convinced the most powerful military man in that country that God existed, and not only did God exist, but he's the only God. He is the God, not a God. He is the God. Good decisions, good result, good basis. Why did she make that good decision? She saw an opportunity to help somebody. She cared. She loved. She based her decision making on that. Now let's look at another one that's probably familiar with us all, and this goes along with Drew's reading. And again, we all know this story real well, but we always forget about or don't really ever talk about this character. None whatsoever. So you go over to John chapter 6, and by the way, I didn't mention this, but Drew did an excellent job with the reading. Anderson did an excellent job with the prayer. I bragged on the singing, and I really appreciate it that Anderson said that he hoped that my preparation and memory would serve me well. And I know the preparation will, Anderson. It's just my memory ain't much anymore, so we'll just have to see how that goes. But over in John chapter 6, we come across the story of feeding of the 5,000. My guess is, let me just do this. How many people have heard about the feeding of the 5,000, the fishes and loaves? Now, that's a pretty good number, right? And we go through that story, and what we're all always amazed about is what? What we're always amazed about. We're always amazed about that there was only 2 fishes and 5 barley loaves, and we took all that and we fed 5,000 men, and there's always a dispute about how many we fed because it says 5,000 men, and we know there was women and children there, so may have fed a whole lot more. And so we always talk about this story, how Jesus performed this miracle so much that there were several baskets left over when they were done after feeding all those people. But here's what I don't ever hear much talk about. It's the young person that made all that happen. Did y'all know that? Did y'all know that? It was a young person. The Bible tells us it was a lad. Do you know what a lad is? It's a young boy. It's a young man. That's what a lad is. I know people don't open up that thing called Webster's Dictionary anymore because you get your Googler out and you Google it, don't you? Yeah, you get your Google machine and you look up lad, and that's how you figure it out. But a lad is a young boy. And so he was really the star of the show. Because here's the question. I know that Jesus turned those loaves of bread into many loaves of bread. I know he turned those 2 fishes into a lot of fishes. Where did he get the fishes and the loaves? Now there's what? St. Matthew, is there 3 or 4 accounts of feeding the 5,000 in the New Testament? Well, that's all right, because here's the thing. There's only one of them where we get the full story. There's only one of them where we figure out where the fishes and the loaves came from. So if we look in John chapter 6 and starting at about verse 6, Anderson, maybe you should have prayed for my eyesight just a little bit. That would have probably been good. You think we could redo that? So we go to John chapter 6 and verse 6, and now let's back up to verse 5, because Jesus said to Philip, well, where would we buy bread so that these may eat? And then Philip said, well, Lord, we only have 200 denarii, and what's that going to do? How's that going to feed 5,000? I don't have a clue, do you? But verse 9. All right, this is the one you got to listen to. Verse 9. This is the one you circle. It said, well, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. Now, you can read the other accounts of the feeding the 5,000, and we don't learn about him, but we do here. He said, there's a lad here. There's a young boy here, and he's got 2 fishes and 5 loaves. Well, that's not going to do anything with 5,000 plus people, is it? Do y'all know a decision had to be made? A decision had to be made by that young boy right there. He had to make a decision. What was the decision he had to make? He had the fishes and loaves, right? They were his. Honestly, I don't know if they were for his family. I don't know if he was a big eater like me and he was going to have it all. I don't know. I don't even know if he might have been there for the purpose of maybe selling a little fish and loaves and making a little money on the side, along the riverbank there. But this I do know. At some point, one of the apostles or Jesus asked that young man, can we have your fishes and loaves? Because they were his, and they couldn't have been taken and used if he hadn't made a decision. Now, I agree that in the passage it says Jesus already knew what was going to happen. Well, sure he did. But still, that young man had to make a decision. He had to decide whether or not he was going to give them his 2 fishes and loaves. He made a good decision. Because what do we learn? We learn that Jesus told them all sit down and told his apostles start handing them out. And when it was all said and done, there was all kinds of left over. It was a great miracle. He turned 2 fishes into we don't know how many. We know there was what? Maybe 12 baskets of bread left over, something like that. There's a bunch. But the young man made a good decision. Now, what did his good decision, what was the result of it? Well, you go, obviously, Guy, 5,000 plus people got to eat, right? And they were hungry. But it's so much more than that. Because, don't you see, that example, that situation gave Jesus the chance to illustrate his divine power, to show that he was God, that he had the ability to do those things, that he was the Messiah. That's what that example that young man did. And to show he was the Christ. And then you go to Drew's reading, and this is what I really want you to see now. Verse 14 says, therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, that's Jesus, that Jesus had performed, they said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. What this young man did by giving his fishes and loaves, making that good decision, allowed Jesus to be told to the world by these people, by over 5,000, it is the Christ who has come. This is the Messiah. He is here. Now I just wonder, let's think for a second. How many of us have ever got the chance to do something that exposed 5,000 people to Jesus? I've not. I don't know about you. But that little boy did. And you know what else? Actually, I think with the power of children, with the power of young folks, the way you all quote, network, communicate, talk, squawk, all those things, y'all could probably do that. Y'all could probably reach that many people. Good decision by a young lad, by a young man. Let's take a look at another one. Ooh-wee. I'm serious, Edward. What time did you come down here? I'm real serious. His Draper Graham say I'm really serious. You say what time? 7:30. You came down here at 7:30. Well, yeah, you better talk a little faster. I think that's what it's going to take. 7. All right, a little late. Now, another good decision I want to talk about. Y'all bear with me. I love this story. And I love to go back and read it. And I'll be honest, only just a few days ago, when I was preparing this lesson, did I grasp the last part of the importance of this story. All right. My wife watches Hallmark Christmas movies and makes me watch them, makes me cry with her and all that stuff. And so I'll just go ahead and get it out there. And the love stories and all that stuff. My favorite book in the Bible is the Book of Esther. I read it more than any other book I've ever read in the Bible. Over and over again. And y'all know the hero of Esther is a young girl. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly, but biblical scholars, those people that has put their life into trying to decipher the Bible, suggest that based on custom and a lot of other things, when the story of Esther comes about, she was probably 14 years old. Now, again, I told you the source. We don't know that for sure. 14 years old, little Esther. I know a lot of you all know about that story, but I want to go back again, talk about Esther, because she made a good decision. Made a good decision. Sometimes people tell me, well, it's easy to make good decisions when you're in a good spot and you got good around you and there's nothing bad going on, this, that, and the other. And you've had it easy and et cetera, et cetera. It's always easy to make good decisions. Maybe there's some truth to that. But before we get too far down the road on Esther, I want you to think about her background before she made this, quote, good decision. Her mama was deceased. That means dead. She had no mama to raise her up, to influence her, to give her, to nurture her, to give her guidance. Her daddy was dead. She had no father to look to try to protect his daughter, to look after her, to take care of her, to nurture her as a father should. She didn't have that. She'd been kidnapped. Or I should say her people had. It's another way to put it. Because she was now in Babylon. When Esther takes place, she's in Babylon. And she is from Israel. She is Jewish. But remember, Nebuchadnezzar came out of Babylon and went over there into Judah and Israel, and then 2 or 3 waves or 4 waves or 5 waves of them kidnapped them and took them. They call it into exile, but really, folks, it was basically into slavery over in Babylon. So this young girl, age of 14, no mama, no daddy, in a country totally foreign to her, basically was a slave. I think I researched one time it takes 6 months, or took 6 months walking from Israel to where they were located in Babylon. So been through a lot of hardships. She'd been through a lot of hardships. And she made a good decision. Young girl made a good decision. Now, y'all remember the decision. Let's talk about that just a little bit. So there was this bad guy. And this bad guy, Haman, he went to the king and said, King, I want you to sign this decree that says on a certain day, all the Jews will be killed. All the Jews of the land be killed. That would mean every single Jew that they had brought out of Judah and Israel, every single one of them settled here in Babylon would be killed, would be wiped out on this particular day. That'd be the end of it. Now, by the way, this is a spoiler alert. That wasn't going to happen. Because God had already said through the prophets, Jeremiah, that he was going to preserve a remnant of Israel that would later on come back home. And it did. Read Nehemiah and Ezra, you'll see that happen. But that's a spoiler alert. Don't worry about that. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. So, but what I do want you to see is that when this young lady's uncle, Mordecai, that had raised her, when he found out that this bad guy was going to kill all the Jews, which would include him and who else? Esther, right. He goes to her and says, you got to do something. Now, how could she do something? Well, this is how she could do something. It just so happened the king had went out and he was unhappy with the other queen. Says, oh, go pick me up all the prettiest women in the land, bring them in here and put makeup on them and mess with their hair and do all that stuff and what have you. And I'm going to pick one of them as the queen. So she was one of those women that was in that position. And that's the reason Mordecai thought she might could do something. So Mordecai says, you got to go talk to the king. You've got to get him to help out. You got to get him to do something. And let's think about what she said. And let me tell you something. You can try to read all day in John about Esther, but it ain't there. You got to turn to Esther to read about Esther. So we get over here to Esther chapter 4 and about verse 11. Esther, Anderson, you sure you can't do something about these eyes? All right. It says, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. Now that's what Esther told Mordecai. Do y'all get what she's saying? Look, if I go to the king and I talk to him about this, if he hasn't invited me in, if he doesn't take that royal scepter and, put it over my head, I'm dead. I'm dead. That's what's going to happen. I'm going to die. So she had to make a decision. Esther had to make a decision. Who all here is 14? She could have been 15. Who all here is 15? She might have been 13. Who all here is 13? Now think about this. You're 13, 14, 15 years old, and the question is, do you go talk to the king or not? What's your decision, knowing that if you go talk to the king, you may be killed? That's where she was. That's where she was. Esther had to make a decision. So what did she think about? She thought about her people. She thought about her uncle. She thought about the fact that she was part of God's people that had been brought out of the land that God had given to the Jews in Israel. She thought about all those things. She thought about all the lives she could save. And she made a decision. She took the risk, went before the king, and she asked him to reverse that decree, or to put it differently, to put down a decree that would take away the bad guy before the bad guy could take away the Jews. And it was done. Good decision, good result. As a result of what Esther did, the Jews weren't killed. They weren't wiped out. There was a remnant left, only because she, and she alone, because it says she had favor with the king, and because she had favor with the king, her wish was granted. Now, here, folks, is the part that I admit that I've missed each time I've read Esther. And shame on me for missing this. You would have thought that everything that Esther did to save all those people, maybe hundreds of thousands, at least thousands, that in of itself would be great enough about her good decision. But let me tell you something else where good decisions lead you. I want you to see this so you know for sure that this is the way it is. If you go to Matthew chapter 1, some people think Matthew chapter 1 through verse 17 is some of the boringest part of the Bible they've ever read. And it's some of the best part. The reason they think it's boring is because it's genealogies. You know what genealogies are? This was this one's daddy, this one was this one's daddy, this was this one's mama, this. So you go to Matthew chapter 1 and you get down to verse 12. And it says, after the deportation to Babylon, that means after the Jewish people had been taken out of Israel, had been taken out of Judah, had been taken to Babylon into captivity. It says, after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel was the father of Ehud, and it keeps going, as you all know, until it gets down to verse 16, and it says, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who was called the Messiah. We normally look at that as the lineage from Abraham to Christ. And when we look at that lineage from Abraham to Christ, and it tells us where those kings were, something very important pops out. If you looked at that closely, Jeconiah, who was the king in that lineage, whose son was led all the way down to Joseph, he was one of those people that was in captivity in Babylon that would have been killed based upon the king's decree, if but for one little girl. One little girl made a good decision, and as a result of that good decision, the lineage, literally the familial lineage all the way down to Jesus, remained in place. Now, I think God was going to make that happen one way or the other, but folks, it's pretty important to me, and it's pretty stout to me to think that one little girl made that happen. Now, I want to talk about one more, and then I'm going to wrap it up, because I like something about this good decision. Because this last good decision wasn't just a good decision, it was good decisions. Go with me just a second back to Genesis 39. And again, it's a familiar story. I just want you to look at it from a different aspect. You go back to Genesis chapter 39 and about verse 11, and it is a discussion about Joseph. It's a discussion about Joseph. And I want to back all the way up to about verse 6. Y'all know Joseph was a young guy. His brothers had thrown him in a pit, tried to make it look like he was dead. They were jealous of him. Along came the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites were traitors. The Ishmaelites worked a deal with Joseph's brothers and says, okay, we'd like to have him. We'll pay for him. We'll whatever. And so there he goes. And the Ishmaelites, they get in there to Egypt. They get up there to Egypt, and they say, we got this boy here to sell to you, and what will you give for him? And they made a deal. Ishmaelites sold him to Potiphar, who was the head or king or however you want to describe him, but he was the big guy of Egypt. And he put Joseph to work in his house. Young guy, Joseph. Maybe 16, maybe 17, maybe a little more, guys. Did a good job there. Said he was a good-looking young man. That's what the Bible tells us. He said he was handsome in appearance. King's wife took a liking to him, but in a bad way. And the king's wife asked Joseph to do some things with her that she knew was not right. More importantly, Joseph knew wasn't right. And specifically, it says this. It says it came about his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, basically, this is my boss. This is not something I should be doing. No. And then it says, as she spoke to Joseph day after day, saying the same thing to him. Same thing. Enticed him. Trying to get him to do something wrong. Trying to get him to lie with her. And day after day, he said no. Now, I want to point this out to you because good decisions create more good decisions. And when you make one good decision, it makes it easier to make another good decision. So the first time, Joseph told her, no, I'm not going to do it. When he had the courage and the thoughtfulness and the belief and the faith and the strength to say no the first time, when she started the second time, it was much easier for him to say no. And then the third time, it was no. And then the fourth time, it was no. And then the fifth time, it was no. And finally, he made that good decision so many times, she realized his no was no. In fact, if you read the story further, she literally tried to, as they say, frame him to make it look like he wasn't saying no, even though he did every time. He made a good decision. Now, I know some of you all know the story of Joseph, and you're saying, well, wait a minute, Guy. Didn't he go to the prison after that? Because she made a false accusation? Didn't he go into a dungeon? Well, yes, he did, but he still made a good decision because, first of all, he made a decision that said, this is wrong. This is sinful. I'm not going to do it. It's against God. And he knew it was wrong. And even though he suffered bad consequences, but keep in mind, young folks, that good decision paid off later on. Because later on, once the dust had cleared and the truth was known, Potiphar actually ended up making him the strongest man in his country. He said, there's nothing that you don't have control over. You've got it all. And more importantly about that was, Potiphar said something else. Joseph, because of you, I know that there is a God, because only through God have you been able to do what you've been able to do. This was a pagan country. This was a country that worshiped rocks and animals as gods and everything else. But at least at that time, Potiphar was convinced of God Almighty. Young man makes a good decision, leads to a good result. Young folks, there's an old saying, you are what you eat. Don't you look at my belly, I saw that. But you are what you eat. You are the decisions that you make. You are the decisions that you make in life. Whatever decisions you make, that's what makes you become what you are. You make those good decisions, it makes those results good. When you make one good decision, just like Joseph, it turns to another good decision. And then your life becomes about good decisions. I want you tonight, really all this week, I want you to think about making those good decisions and thinking about the good things that can happen from those good decisions and thinking about how you can be an instrument for the Lord by making those good decisions. A lot of you all have made the ultimate good decision and become a child of God. Some of you, quite frankly, you may not yet be old enough to make that good decision. You may not have had those considerations and thoughts within yourself, but then some of you have. And some of you know that there's a good decision that you've not made in your life yet that you need to make, and that's to become a child of God. Because that's the one best decision that you can ever make the rest of your life. That will always, always serve you well. Tonight, if you've not become a child of God, if you've not been baptized and buried with Him to wash away your sins, if you've not confessed that Jesus is the Christ, if you've not said, I want to be different, I want to be called a Christian, I want to be a child of God, then we have opportunity. We may not be at your church building. We have water. We have water just right under this metal pan, and we can accommodate you. It could be that you are a Christian, and just maybe, you've not been making the good decisions that you wished you'd make. And it could be that you might just say, you know, I need some forgiveness. I need for somebody to pray with me and for me to help me from making those bad decisions and to keep making good decisions. And you just may need a little help. You may just need somebody praying for you to help you think about making good decisions. Not that you've made some bad ones, but you're just worried about that. So, you know, if we can help you within those spiritual needs, would you come now as Brother Matthew leads us in this song?